Hi there, this is BJ Jones. I'm the artistic director of Northlight Theater. And yes, I'm still at home, as I assume are all of you. And I hope you're getting your shots sooner than later. Let's put it that way. And today, we're going to have a conversation with our friends Jeff Hatcher and Eric Simonson, who are the playwrights of the play that we're doing a reading of, Wright and Rand, with myself and Tracy Arnold. And gentlemen, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's we recorded this last week, and I really had a good time. I haven't acted in a while, and I really had a good time doing it. And Tracy Arnold, of course, is magnificent, and I'm grateful to David Ira Goldstein, who directed the reading and who's been collaborating with you both on this for quite a while. But I'm curious, you both worked on Frank Lloyd Wright pieces before, and the one that is most well known, I think, is Work Song. And give me a little background on how you got interested in doing some work on a Frank Lloyd Wright piece. Where did this get started?
You want me to start, Jeff? And
Oh yeah, please do.
you. I came to Jeff. This is a long time ago. We were very young, but initially I got interested in Frank Lloyd Wright because I was friends with Scott McPherson. And he was a fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. Scott is the playwright of Marvin's Room. And he and I were in our 20s, and we were in Chicago and starving, and we were always looking for something to do. And Scott was fascinated with Frank Lloyd Wright. And he said, I want to do a play about Frank Lloyd Wright. And I said, well, I want to direct a play about Frank Lloyd Wright written by you. And then Scott sadly passed away at a very young age. I think he was 33 years old. But I by that time I was sort of like hooked on Frank Lloyd Wright. I was living in Chicago. There are all sorts of houses that you could see. I became very interested in what he was trying to do with architecture, and as an artist, what he was doing creatively just sparked an interest for me. So I held on to this idea, but I wasn't really writing that much, if at all, at that time. But Jeff and I met doing a project in Chicago. Also, we were working on a musical, and I said, Jeff, I have this project I want to do. I don't know what it is, but it'd be a play about Frank Lloyd Wright, and maybe you and I could write it together. And Jeff said, sure. But I don't know how much you knew about Frank Lloyd Wright at that time, Jeff.
Well, certainly not as much as you, but it's true. Then the next year was taken up with lots of research and visiting different places. Taliesin and the whatever houses. I mean, around where I am in Minneapolis, St. Paul, there are a good few. Yeah, a good few famous ones too, including the one that was torn down sometime in the 60s and 70s and is now part of different museums. The Met has parts of it. I think probably the Art Institute in Chicago and the MIA in Minneapolis has parts of this house that was taken down. But then very soon thereafter, Eric and I decided.
What's that? At Mama Cheney's house too, I remember.
Yeah, that was kind of freaky because the house that Frank designed for Mama Cheney, who was his lover, his mistress, and who died in that terrible murder fire out of Taliesin. At that time, the house was a B&B in Oak Park, and I spent a night there. And the guy who lived there was an attorney who had tried to furnish it in ways that made it feel like it was 1910 or so. So when you went in there, it was very much, wow, it does feel like the house that he designed for her and in which she and her husband never lived, because then she ran off with Frank. But Work Song was three one acts, and Eric and I alternated writing them, and then Eric directed the whole piece.
Yeah, it was commissioned by Steppenwolf and Milwaukee Rep.
Yeah.
I saw the Milwaukee Rep production. It was huge.
Yeah, that was intentional. I thought, Frank Lloyd Wright's a larger than life figure. Why not make a larger than life play? And it was sort of like out of fashion because even back then, theaters were looking for plays that had, no more than six actors in one set. I thought, no, we're going to do this big, really big. So each act, there was 3 acts. Each act was completely different from the next stylistically, and each act dealt with a different part of Frank Lloyd Wright's life. And Milwaukee Rep, to its credit, really committed. They put a lot of resources in it, and they, it did really well for them. And then we got a bunch of other productions across the country that we did.
Now,
Kansas City, Pittsburgh.
yeah. Let's, moving forward now, here we are with Wright and Rand. And the idea here was to do a smaller sort of chamber piece, sort of clashing these two iconic, quirky, brilliant individuals up against one another. How did that sort of gestate?
Well, Jeff is.
Well, actually, Ayn Rand is in Work Song. There's a couple of changes they have in the second of the 3 one acts.
Their cocktail party is.
Pardon me?
Cocktail party or something.
Yeah. And but a lot of people had said over the years, oh, you should really do something about the 2 of them banging up against each other in a big way, because obviously she'd based the character Howard Rourke on Frank, in The Fountainhead. So it made a lot of sense that it would be the 2 of them. There are 4 agreed upon meetings that they really had. And so we thought, all right, let's do these, the 4 meetings about her book, about him wanting to design a house for her, and about her wanting him to do the designs for the film version of The Fountainhead. So it was kind of an obvious, why not see this Clash of the Titans thing happen. And we worked on it pretty much the same way as we'd done Work Song. Eric would take a scene, I'd take a scene, back and forth, and then occasionally we go fiddle in each other's work.
That's interesting. Not a lot of people do that kind of collaboration with the geniality that you 2, I think, have exhibited. Because I've, the conversations that we had while we were recording were very generous, I thought. And Jeff, you've done that quite a bit in your career. You did.
I'm a very genial person, as you can see from my expression.
You can't tell.
I'm a lot of laughs, and everyone loves me.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. In fact, Jeff, I think we've done, I think between you and Bruce Graham, you were the 2 most produced playwrights at Northlight. Did you know that?
Yeah, I do. And I wish I could say that it makes me proud.
Ow. What the heck?
No, I'm very pleased by it. I'm very pleased by it. Of course I am.
Yeah, that's good. Glad to hear it. Ayn Rand is a tough character to bring to life, likably.
Well, she's a character.
She's a character.
She's actually very fun to write because she doesn't have much of a sense of humor, especially about herself.
Or her work.
Yeah, but that's rich. That's what you look for when you're writing a character. You want somebody that's identifiable and you can really get to the heart of them.
And her fan base is slightly unlikable as well, I think. How did you? Because actually, in the reading, she's very generous with Frank, at the end of the play, I think the sort of coda that each of them have at the end of the play, he talks about making amends with her, but she's very generous with him at the end of the play, I think.
Well, that's Eric. Are you giving her more credit? Because Eric wrote those last speeches. Are you giving her more credit than she deserves, or do you think?
I no, she's more. There's a private side of Ayn Rand that people don't see. That's very passionate and emotional. She didn't show it to many people, but she was involved in very torrid love affairs with her younger proteges, and she would get hurt and wounded, and she dealt with them in different ways. But you have to remember, at the end of our play, by the time that she's very nice to Frank, Frank's not around to really, you know, to hear it. So I think she feels a lot more, generous than she would have if he was in the room.
It's interesting.
And we meet her at the very beginning of the play when she's a nobody, basically.
Yeah.
So she's a little like, she comes off a little like a tentative stalker who wants to give Frank her novel to read, the one that's based on him.
I think in real life, the sort of like relationship that you start with anybody sort of sticks around for a lifetime. So if you meet somebody and you're subservient to them, or the other way around, and then the tables kind of flip, it's still hard to come together with that person and create a new kind of dynamic with them. I think that's what happened with Ayn and Frank, despite the fact that Ayn really was sort of like, at times in her life, she was eclipsing Frank in popularity and notoriety. It was hard for her to get out from under the fact that she worshiped this man as a young writer.
I think that's kind of true with parents as well, isn't it? I mean, parents and children. I think sometimes it's very hard to as a child grows up, it's very hard for some parents to let them generously grow into the adult that they become. Sometimes when personas shift and conditions shift, it's very hard.
Oh yeah, there's a kind of "I knew you when" thing.
Yeah, that's exactly.
If you could have 2 or 3 Oscars under your belt, Eric's got an Oscar.
Yeah, that's right.
And if somebody knew you when you were an intern getting coffee, it's always going to be a problem with the person who knew you when you were an intern.
Yeah. So I'm curious about. I'm continually curious about Ayn Rand because, she came from Russia, so she obviously had a deep loathing for communism, which I assumed would be the basis for her sort of fascism, even though she said she wasn't a fascist. You have a line in the play that I find interesting, and that is,
was absolutely not a fascist. She believed that when World War II came around, she denounced Hitler, and she thought that sort of like allowing the state to control your life is just as bad as allowing capital or communist leaders control your life. It's all about control over versus control over the masses as opposed to individual, you being able to dictate your own fate. That's what she was all about.
Is that why Greenspan is sort of a fan of hers?
There was a lot of economics that was wrapped up in her philosophy, which I really can't speak on expertly, but I think that he was drawn to that, and he was drawn to the way that the individual markets, more Adam Smith, the markets will take care of themselves, and there's morality in the way the markets take care of themselves.
There's a wonderful line in the play that talks about the liberals think I'm conservative and the conservatives think I'm liberal.
Yeah.
How did she see herself?
She saw herself as a person who was willful, and because she was so successful, I think it confirmed the fact that she thought that if she willed it, if she saw it in her mind, she could will it into being. You know, and I think that she thought that if I can do it, then everyone can do it. Anyone can do it. And what's stopping people, except that they don't know that yet. They're living in a dark cave, and they haven't gotten the news. If she was a failure, who knows what would have happened? She would have turned into a crank, I guess, or a homeless person on the street. But she had enough talent to get her thoughts across, and she has. Right. I mean, who else could be born and speak one language until they're 18 years old, and then come to go to another country and write a bestseller within 15 years
Tom,
in that language of
Tom, Stoppard.
their adopted country?
Tom Stoppard.
How old was he when he immigrated?
That's a good question. I don't know that.
Well, I think he grew up with what was it, Lieutenant or Captain Stoppard, because his real father was Czech,
Right.
and then his mother married a British officer. So I think he knew English early on. But it is true. Many writers, I mean, you have to be talented already, but many writers for whom English is a second language have been some of our most dazzling stylists. Nabokov, for example.
Yeah.
Stoppard's another good example. I think once you learn, you go into overdrive if you're that kind of intelligence.
Yeah. I kind of find her fascinating, and I understand why she's obsessed with Wright, because what you just articulated about her, if I can do it, anybody can do it, and if I can envision it, it can be so. That you articulate that in Wright's philosophy as well. He as much as says that in the play.
Yeah.
And they're both of them outsiders, despite the fact that Frank was, he was born into, what would we call it? Would we call it, is there such a thing as the upper middle class intelligentsia of the farming community of Wisconsin?
He was, I don't think they had much money, but they did revere learning and schooling and intelligence and free thinking. So I wouldn't call him upper middle class in rural Wisconsin. I just call him enlightened.
His sisters taught at the school and all that sort of thing. Yeah, enlightened, yes.
Yeah.
But neither of them were the preferred artists of the intelligentsia or the academic, the academy. I mean, they were never really the cool kids. The cool kids were Bauhaus and the international school and all that. And one of my favorite lines from a movie, I think Buck Henry wrote it, in Heaven Can Wait. At some point, Charles Grodin says to Diane Cannon, he says, "Pick up that fountainhead and pretend you're reading it." And I think the reputation is that she's unreadable. I don't think that's true. But the fountainhead in particular is a success because it's a potboiler. It's a potboiler that has an idea behind it and is based in a real person, right? But she was never favored by critics. And so I think both of them have a little chip on their shoulder about, we know we're pretty great, but they don't see us that way. And I think that must have been some connection for them, don't you think?
Yeah, I was going against the grain. The thorn in the side of the sort of like the powers that be in the chosen fields.
I think.
Famously, Frank designed that gas station in Cloquet, Minnesota. And there is a sequence in the book, right, where Howard Rourke designs a gas station. I think Frank designed the gas station after the book. I could be wrong. You'd think it was the other way around.
I can't remember.
Uh, I know it's a famous scene in the movie where Gary Cooper shows somebody the model for the gas station. It's like, man can design any kind of structure for any kind of use. Uh, but who else do you know designed a gas station of that? Like, you know, Le Corbusier didn't. None of those guys did.
Well,
I-
Frank didn't have that many opportunities. I mean, there are very few public buildings that he built because he just didn't get hired to build those things, and very few buildings outside of America. I can't think of any actually. I think they were all designed in North America.
Do you count churches as public buildings? I was just as a question, would you?
Yeah.
Because he's one of the books I have, one of the like 40 Frank Lloyd Wright books I have now is like Frank Lloyd Wright's churches. And a friend of mine did a documentary about them. And they're fascinating to go to. We've gone to a few, haven't we? I mean, Unity Temple in Oak Park. And Frank was a Unitarian, right? Isn't it fair to say at least he grew up that way?
Yep, that's right.
That is, it's a beautiful working out of the theory of the relationship between the minister and the audience, or sorry, the congregation.
And
Naturally, I think of it as an audience, but the minister is not higher than, in terms of his position, than his congregation. You know, he is kind of in a sort of a well, like the well of the House of Representatives, and it's a way of talking about that issue. You know, am I on your level, or are we part of a community?
He's obsessed with height and relationship, and most of his houses you entered into a foyer that would, you know, it's just a few inches higher than your head, and then you walked a few steps and you opened up into this space, and you were suddenly overwhelmed by the space and the height and whatever you're looking at in terms of like outside and landscape. He was really a genius at being able to envision how it was going to be like walking through a space before he built that space.
What was the one in LA that you and I and Susan and Henry, when Henry was a baby, we went to? He was in a pram, I believe.
Hollyhock House.
Right. That's a good
Yeah,
example of that, isn't it?
it is. Yeah, and also the way the house is situated on the top of the hill. It's actually not of the hill. It's actually on top of the hill. But yeah, his spaces are inspirational. And
Did
you
he
know,
have a number of places out in Los Angeles or in California in general?
yeah, there was a time when his son was working out here, and he found work out here. So there are, I don't know, I guess a dozen buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright out here, and of course there's the Marin County building up in the Bay Area that he built that's still in use. I have a brother-in-law who works there.
Really?
Yeah, he built everything from the offices to the jails to a restaurant, and it looks like a lunar landing. I mean, it still does to this day. It looks like something out of Star Wars.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, thanks for letting us do the reading. It was really fun and interesting.
Yeah, it was a treat. It was a joy to see you, BJ, acting after so long and doing an incredible job as Frank Lloyd Wright.
My swan song.
It's like John Houseman doing the paper chase. Now you'll have an entire career.
Oh, yeah. Oh Lord. Yeah. He then he went on from there to commercials. The complete reverse of my career, actually. So well, thanks very much, you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no
Thank
problem.
you.
All right.